All right. Thank you, everyone, for making it back to the second presentation. Next up, we have Warren Turkal, or also known as Woot. You do the hand gesture. All right. So we have Woot, who is going to talk about network backup with Bacula. Warren?
All right. So I imagine that all of you probably know about backup, so I'm not even going to touch on that. First of all, I guess I want to say what my job is and why I'm interested in this. I'm a cluster systems administrator at the Colorado State University. I work for the atmospheric sciences and a lot of scientists who use our cluster. And we're talking huge data sets. I think right now we have 10 terabytes of data with only about 15 people in the group. So, having said that, I just started working there in January, and their backup system was pretty abysmal before I got there. It's still not great, but we're getting better. All right. Being from Colorado State University, I wanted to thank you all for paying for my trip here through grants and everything else. But anyway, so let's get started with the actual backup portion of the trip. Anyone who is familiar with other kinds of network backup, you will probably notice that there's some functionality missing. Bacula is a relatively young open source project. I think it's been around since 99 or 2000. I'm not exactly sure of all the history of it, but it was started by one of the original founding members of Autodesk. So, having said that, the code has been developed over that time, and it represents one of the best open source backups that you can get. It supports a few different types of backup. It supports your full, differential, and incremental. And if you're familiar with any type of backup, you probably know what a full and an incremental are. A differential is somewhat more complex. It's just like an incremental that goes back to the last full instead of using all the incrementals up to that point. And the idea is just to limit the number of physical media that you need to pull a most recent backup. So if you take a full at the beginning of the month and then take an incremental every day and then take a differential at the end of the week, when you start restoring from that differential, you don't have to pull from all those incrementals. You just pull from the full and the differential. And then any incrementals done after that can actually be built on to the differential and the full, so thereby limiting their need for additional media also. There's something weird happening. I'm hearing some feedback maybe. Am I too far forward? Okay. Okay. All right. With regard to the types of recovery, there are two types of recovery that are supported by Bacula. That is your normal recovery, where you're just restoring a file here and there. And then there's bare metal recovery. I'm not really going to go over the bare metal recovery here, but that is possible with Bacula. And what's amazing is that it's even supported for more than just Linux. It's supported for Windows if you're very careful. So these are more recent developments, and I'll go through those in a minute. Some of the good things about Bacula is that it's, of course, free and open source software for those who care. It has distributed operations so that you're not limited to backing up to the machine that the data is on. So I can spread out the different components, and I'll get into the components in a minute, but it's more than just not having to back up to the system that you're on. You can actually coordinate backup centrally for all of your systems. You can monitor it all centrally, and all this functionality is built in. You have the director, file daemon, storage daemon, and console, and now I'm going to show you how they can I walk in front of the screen if I need to? All right, so you have the director, which is kind of the center of everything, and it controls everything. It's where you go when you want to query the system. It's where you go to coordinate all of the things that happen in the system. The director uses a database, and it's not some custom-written database. It has a MySQL backend. It has a PostgreSQL backend, which is one of the better ones, and it has the little tiny one. I don't know what it is. I don't use it. So, but you can see also that the director communicates with the file and storage daemons. Your file daemon is what's going to actually give access to the files that you're backing up. So that has to run on any machine that is to be backed up. And then you have your storage daemon, which represents any machine that has a place for you to store your data. So if I have a tape drive on some system, that has to run a storage daemon in order to be able to store the backups onto that media. And there are many different media supported. It handles tape the best, but it also handles disk and DVD, and particularly much improved DVD support is going to be coming available in the next version. So what that practically means for everyone is that I can go to one place and figure out what's happening on my backups. I can query and make sure that they were successful. I can schedule them in ways that I feel are appropriate. There are, many mechanisms. I mean, there are a few limitations to the mechanism. Like, you can't do something like every other week do a differential because you have a problem at the end of the month. You can only say every third Thursday of a month. You can't say every second Thursday of the year. So that can produce some limitations for people if you have to take certain types of backups. There are ways around it which involve creating multiple jobs being each backup is a job, and you can create multiple jobs with different schedules to get around that limitation to some degree. The file daemon, of course, is a place that could potentially have some major, problems. If someone were to crack into your file daemons, they have access to everything. I mean, it runs as root. It has to have access to all the files in order to back them up. And further, it has access to all the file metadata because all that gets backed up as well, which is something that doesn't necessarily happen with other backup systems that I've played with. So that's what actually makes it useful for bare metal recovery, is that you can go in and say, I want everything about this file that's here, I want it back, and I want it back just the way that it was. Access times, permissions, ACLs, you name it. So, and the really nice thing, again, if you have to support a multi-architecture environment, it also supports Windows and Mac OS because it's Unix, but it actually supports Windows ACLs. So you can go in and back up your Windows systems, and when you restore the file, you can rest assured that it actually has the same permissions that it had when it got backed up, which is not a property that I've seen in any other backup system that I've played with. So some of the features that it has right now, and they're actually going into a beta test for the next release. The main developer is going on vacation, so there's a beta out now. There will be a final beta in November, and hopefully that'll be the last of the tests before the next version. But it has transport encryption, meaning right now you can encrypt over the wire. So anything that's going over your network is encrypted. Unfortunately, you can't encrypt on media. So if you have any, sensitive medical data that you're backing up for someone else, this probably won't be HIPAA compliant because you can't encrypt that data and make sure that no one can see it except for the doctors. And, if you have any other reason that you'd want on-media encryption, that is not available in the current version. It does support many different media types. I already kind of talked about that. I didn't really hit on the fact that it has auto-changer support, which is extremely useful because I can go in and define an auto-changer, set up a bunch of volumes, and then it can actually use the barcodes to find the right volume to put in. I want to back up to such and such a volume. It also does things for you like volume recycling. So it knows that after 6 months, a volume can be reused. You can set all that stuff up, or you can do manual recycling, which is much easier on a smaller environment. But when you get into a big environment, you're going to have something that says, ultimately after a certain period of time, I can reuse these tapes or the volumes, whatever they are. They're not necessarily tapes. I mean, they could be hard disks, they could be DVDs, they could be actually files on a file system. So there are a few different ways to support the hard disk drives. Some of them are kind of hacks right now, which is kind of limitation in a way, but usually most of it can be worked around. It depends on whether you want to use actual devices or whether you're using NFS mounts to back up your stuff. I mean, you can actually back up to a file on an NFS mount, which is interesting and useful in some contexts, I suppose. The really nice thing about it, though, and it's the thing that I haven't seen in any other open source system, is the platform flexibility. It will work on Linux, Unix, Mac OS, and Windows. And I guess it's not surprising that it works on the various Unixes. That's very common. You have Amanda out there that does its thing, and you have backup, AF backup, and some of the others. And they support Unix really well. But most of those don't support Windows very well. You might be able to back up the files over a Samba share or something, but that's not going to preserve your permissions and all that stuff. So Bacula is very unique in the open source world, if for nothing else that reason. And I think that because of that, I think that it really stands on its own level of being able to be used in a cross-platform environment and really unifying your system and not having to rely on different backup systems for different systems. The other thing, this including in-use files on Windows, if you've ever tried to copy a file that's open in Windows, it'll say, file is being accessed. You can't do that. Well, Bacula actually implements the appropriate APIs in order to allow it to access those files while they are open and back them up at the current time. I'll address this in a minute, but that doesn't include things like databases and actually going in and backing up a database in some special way. This is how my stuff is set up at work. We have a bunch of home directories. This is our smallest volume. It's about 350 gigabytes, and it represents most of the source code that my scientists work with. It also represents things like I have a few users that are using NFS home directories. So on their systems, they're using Linux. They log in. Everything goes to the home directories, and that includes their mail cache and all kinds of stuff. We use IMAP. It's fun stuff. The mail server also gets backed up nightly. I use a Cyrus mail server, and this actually works pretty well with the way that the assumptions that Bacula makes. So I have to say that this has worked out pretty well. I've already had a couple of people that accidentally trashed their entire mail folders and had to be restored, and this has worked beautifully. I was able to pick out the person, restore all their mail, rebuild their mailbox, and they had all their messages that were there from the prior backup. So this has been tested in the field to some degree. I haven't tested the bare metal stuff yet, but all right. So some of the future plans that they're doing. The 1.39 is the one that is in release candidate stage right now. Beta release candidate. They're a lot looser with those terms in the Bacula project than a lot of other projects that I've messed with. So, but I'd say that this is what they're considering release candidates, and they have migration, which is moving from one volume to another, which can be very useful if you have a set of fast disks that you want to do an initial backup to, and then migrate the volume, migrate it over to more long-term storage later on. Say I have hard disks that I want to back up to initially, and after a month I move everything off the tape. That's what the migrations are good for. The on-media encryption, very important to some people. The way that it's implemented, as far as I'm aware, I haven't followed this one too closely, but the file daemon is responsible for actually encrypting everything. So when something comes off of the system, it's actually encrypted already, and the storage daemon doesn't see it unencrypted. So that actually satisfies a lot of problems that you have where the storage daemon would have to encrypt it. Well, that's, if you don't have the storage daemon encrypting it, it doesn't even have to know the key. So therefore, your point of failure is the system itself, and you don't have to worry about some central store of encryption keys that could be compromised, and then you've compromised everything instead of just the one box. The better DVD write support. Basically, DVD write support has been interesting, to say the least. you've been able to write to a DVD, but you haven't been able to span DVDs very easily at this point. So what they're working on is the ability to more easily span those DVDs. Let's see. Then there's the copy support. The copy support is basically like migrations, but you add the fact that you keep the old one. So, I think that's pretty obvious. The incrementals without additional data. This is something that I actually didn't talk about, but the incrementals, when it makes them, Bacula takes the strategy, it restores more than necessary rather than having any chance of not restoring something. So when you make a full backup and then you make an incremental based on that full, if you have deleted a file and then you go and restore from the incremental, it will actually restore the file from the full because it does not track deletions and moves. So it does not know that you have removed something. It does not mark it, and because it doesn't know, it will restore it. If the file is changed, obviously the file is still in record. It's marked as changed and backed up again, but since there's no record put in for the removals, it just doesn't know. There is talk about that, about fixing that particular problem. I feel that that's a fairly important problem when you're dealing with huge data sets that can change on a fairly regular basis. So I've been asking the developers about what their plans are. I've also been checking into some other options with regard to it. The merge is actually interesting. Merge, you can take multiple backups and merge them into one. So basically, you could take a full backup and a series of incrementals and merge them all back into one backup. Therefore, you have a full backup that you didn't have to take a full backup for. Obviously, that depends on the incrementals, backing up correctly. They would have to merge them. They'd have to merge it with that deleted data. But then they'd have what looks like what is a full backup, essentially, without having to retransmit all of the unchanged data over the network. And that would just be, that's very important when you get into data sets like terabytes and terabytes, because it takes hours to back up this stuff. Even on that 350 gigabyte partition that I told you about, it takes 10 hours to run a full backup. I run it on the first Saturday of the month, so it rolls into Sunday about midday. And, that's just, if anyone's changing files at those times, there is no consistency check to make sure that someone's not editing a file while you're backing it up. So, like any other system, that can be addressed to some degree by taking snapshots with LVM or something like that. But when you get to volumes that size, it's sometimes, especially when you're first implementing this, if your system does not have good backup strategies already, you may not have enough space to maintain those snapshots. So, and that's actually our problem, where we would be doing snapshots. So, but the merge would help with that in terms of making it where we didn't have to take a full backup every month. We'd just be able to merge the backups that we have and potentially, not have to transmit any additional over the network. Unless we were moving it over to, we can merge and then migrate it, I suppose. Improved UI. There are some GUI tools to deal with it. The GUI tools suck. To say that they suck, I think, is actually nice. The only thing that they really help with is the restores. They give you a graphical tree to be able to check off the files that you want to restore. And short of that, they're mostly harmless. But they only allow, it's a text client. It looks like a MUD client. You go in and you type the commands in the GUI. You get text response, so it's not really any better than the command line except for that restore functionality. That's the only real UI they have implemented. The plan right now by the lead developer is to rewrite the GUI in Qt. I think that he's looking at Qt3 right now. I cannot speak to to what's actually going to be implemented. I think that he's skeptical about Qt4 because of its distribution. I don't think that he thinks that it's out there enough yet. So, although there's been a large push from the community actually to use Qt4 if they're going to use Qt. So that's really unsettled until the next version anyway. The other components for Windows. I was talking about the various components of the architecture. There's the director, the file daemon, and the storage daemon. You have the consoles also. But the only component that is supported on Windows right now is the file daemon. So you can pull off files and back them up, and you can store them on a Unix server. That's not to say that they don't compile on Windows. It's just to say that they don't know if they work or not. There's been a recent push by one of the developers to make everything work on Windows. It has a really slick nullsoft installer now, or whatever the installer is, but it has a really slick installer now. It can merge your old configuration. It can do a lot of things for you, and actually puts things in the right places. Instead of putting all your configuration files in program files, for instance, it actually puts it in the right place. So those are some of the most important things that I see coming. There are obviously a lot of other projects in the works. Some of these are bigger projects than others. And that's really all that I have. So if there are any questions about Bacula, I'd be more than happy to take them now. And otherwise, let's roll.